Secret 1. The Objection Motif. When you first boot up the Ace Attorney Trilogy HD collection, you're treated to this really great title screen theme that does such a great job capturing the essence and feel of the series, and really getting you excited to start playing these games. What's interesting though is that in these games' original releases, they didn't have title screen themes, or really anything resembling theme songs at all. So, in the absence of a theme song to pull from, the composer of this title screen theme had to figure out a way to encapsulate the entire spirit of Ace Attorney in one tune. And if you're a fan of this series, the way they went about it is really no surprise, because the first melody you hear in this title screen theme is this. That is the Objection motif, named as such because it's the main melody of the first game's iconic Objection theme. Now, I'd guess many Ace Attorney fans consider this to be the sort of de facto main theme of the series, or at least the main theme of the original trilogy. What you might not know is that the original game's composer, Masakazu Sugimori, actually wrote it with the intention of it being the game's main theme. Now, even though the Objection theme didn't end up being used as a main theme for the first game, you might think that because Sugimori intended it to be so, that you might find the Objection motif in other places in the soundtrack, and you'd be right. Well, kind of. A couple of weeks ago, I made an analysis video about Gumshoe's theme from the original Ace Attorney trilogy. It's a really good video, you should check it out after you watch this one. And in the comments of that video, many people brought up that they were surprised that I didn't mention that this sort of piano ostinato that I talked about is actually a reference to the Objection motif. Now, the reason I didn't bring it up is very simple. I didn't notice. I know it's shameful, I'm sorry. But, in my defense, it's actually not the same thing. So the Objection motif in its simplest form is this. Now if you take that motif and flatten it horizontally, you're basically left with a D octave with a G in the middle. So a perfect fourth on the bottom and a perfect fifth on the top. Now if we take the piano ostinato from Gumshoe's theme and transpose it to match the Objection motif, this is what we get. Now if we flatten that horizontally, we get the same D octave, but instead of a G in the middle, we get an A. So that would be a perfect fifth on the bottom and a perfect fourth on the top. Now, this difference is obviously pretty subtle, and I would say that these are intentional variations on the same melodic idea. However, the placement of that middle note makes a huge difference in how these melodies feel, and how you might use them. And it all comes down to where that perfect fifth is. Now, if you were to take the flattened version of the Objection motif and try to name what chord that was, the most logical thing you could call it would be G5, or maybe G5 over D if you want to get really specific. And that's because the perfect fifth in this voicing starts on G, which makes it feel like either a G major or G minor chord, just missing one note, missing the third. And that makes sense because the tonic chord of the Objection theme is, in fact, G minor. Now, if we look at the piano ostinato from Gumshoe's theme in its original key, this, the perfect fifth is on the bottom, starting on C. So in this case, it ends up sounding more like a C chord without the third, which again makes a lot of sense because Gumshoe's theme is in fact in the key of C minor. Now, the main difference between these two ideas is that if you were to write melodies with them, the points of resolution would be different. In the Objection motif, because it's fundamentally some kind of G chord, the note that ends up feeling the most stable is the middle note, because it's a G. But in Gumshoe's theme, because the idea is fundamentally spelling out some kind of C chord, the point of resolution wouldn't be the middle note, it would be either the top or the bottom note, because both of those are C. Now how is this knowledge actually used in practice? Well, let's see. One of the core elements of the original Objection theme is that it always feels like it's building in intensity. It never quite feels resolved, and you wouldn't want it to, because a lot of the hype that tune generates is from all of that building and all the anticipation that it generates. So, in order to help contribute to that unresolved feeling, the main statement of the Objection motif never lands on the middle note, which would be the point of resolution. Instead, it mostly lands on the top note. And just to test that theory, here's what it would sound like if you adjusted the phrase so it did land on that middle note. Yeah, no, that's not it. Funnily enough, if you look at the Trials and Tribulations Objection theme, which borrows heavily from the original game's Objection theme, and uses the same three notes as its melodic foundation, you'll see that it also never lands on the middle note. It always lands on either the top or the bottom. Now, not every tune is going to call for this sort of tense and unresolved atmosphere, so if you tried to use this motif in a more stable environment, you might have a problem. If you didn't make an adjustment. And that's where this second variation, the one you hear in Gumshoe's theme, comes into play. By moving that middle note up a whole step and putting that perfect fifth on the bottom, Sugimori is able to use this motif in a recognizable way in more stable contexts, because now the points of resolution are on the top and bottom instead of the middle. A really great example of this is another place that Sugimori uses the Objection motif in Ace Attorney's score, and it's in a place you might not expect. That's right, it's Maya Fey's theme. Now, Maya Fey's theme is in the key of A flat, but curiously, the A section never actually lands on an A flat chord. I actually made a video about that also. You should check that one out too. You know, after this one. Thank you. Now, even though the A section of Maya Fey's theme never lands on an A flat chord, there are a couple of things that Sugimori does to help emphasize the A flat tonality, and one of those things is using that more stable variation of the objection motif. Have a listen. Did you hear it? Yeah, it's in that little counter melody. So yeah, that's still very recognizably the objection motif, just now it's being used to help create stability by helping to reinforce that song's tonal center of A flat, instead of helping create tension like it does in the objection theme. It's super cool. Now, you might think that with all the possibilities that these two variations of the objection motif give you, that this thing must be all over the score to Ace Attorney, right? Well, it kinda isn't. In fact, as far as I can tell, it's just these three tunes, the objection theme, Maya's theme, and Gumshoe's theme, that have any variation of it at all. I guarantee somebody's gonna post an example of one I missed in the comments the second I post this video. Go ahead. No, seriously, let me know. I'd like to know if I missed something, really. It's enough to make you wonder, why? Is there some reason why Sugimori decided to use what he considered to be the game's main theme in just these three tunes? Like, is there some connection between them? Personally, I don't really think so. And there are plenty of examples in the Ace Attorney series where motifs are used in different contexts to heighten the storytelling, but for a main theme, I think it's more important for it to help establish the game's identity, more so than being a storytelling device. So I don't think there's really any deeper meaning behind the objection motif's presence in Maya and Gumshoe's theme. At the end of the day, if Sugimori considers the objection theme to be the game's main theme, then putting it in Maya and Gumshoe's theme is just another way of making those two tunes sound a little bit more like Ace Attorney. Or maybe it's a total coincidence. Who knows? Now, before we get to the second secret, did you know I'm making a video game? It's called Detective Instinct: Farewell My Beloved, and it's an adventure game inspired by Ace Attorney and other games in the genre like Famicom Detective Club and Hotel Dusk. And if any of this looks or sounds cool to you, you should definitely check us out on Steam and add us to your wishlist. There's also a demo available, and we will be releasing this year on both Steam and Nintendo Switch. Thanks so much, guys. I'll put a link in the description.
Objection!
Secret number 2. Space. When I was a freshman in high school, I took one music theory class that unfortunately wasn't very good. See, the teacher was just really strict, and the structure of the class made it very difficult to figure out how to apply any of the knowledge I was learning to the actual instrument I was playing or the music I wanted to make. However, there was one thing that the teacher said at the beginning of class that always stuck with me because I had never heard music described in this way. What she said was this: music is a combination of sound and silence. I'm going to come back to that idea in a bit. But first, a couple of years ago, a friend of the channel 8-Bit Music Theory made a really great video about the music of the Ace Attorney series, and in particular the formula used in the series' courtroom music. In that video, he makes a really interesting point about the original game's defendant lobby music.
I think this is a genius way to create a musical sense of anticipation. The actual music is super high energy and creates a bunch of momentum, but then it cuts out for 2 full bars of kick drum and the subtlest little hi-hat fills in between each phrase. Creating a bunch of energy and then just cutting it off like this creates a very literal sense of anticipation in the listener, and that feeling ports beautifully onto the character's anticipation of the start of their trial.
So yeah, what he's talking about here is the idea of space, or silence, using silence to build tension that is then resolved when the music kicks back in. But what's interesting is that the defendant lobby music is not the only tune in the original Ace Attorney soundtrack that uses this effect. In fact, it's everywhere. Here are some examples. And really, this is just the obvious examples where almost every instrument except for the drums cut out. There's a lot of space within the individual parts of the tunes as well. Like, listen to the bass line of Gumshoe's theme and just pay attention to how much silence there is in between each phrase. Pretty interesting, right? Back in 2019, Masakazu Sugimori was part of a panel discussion about mystery game music, and during that panel, he mentioned one game as being a very big influence on him when he was composing the music for Ace Attorney. And that game was a visual novel on the Super Nintendo called Kamaitachi no Yoru, later localized in English as Banshee's Last Cry. Now, Banshee's Last Cry is one of the original Chunsoft visual novels. You know, one of the first games to take the command select adventure game formula popularized by games like Portopia and Famicom Detective Club, and remove the command menu entirely to focus on giving a storytelling experience with less involved gameplay mechanics but branching paths in the story. Now, in Ace Attorney creator Shu Takumi's own words, the Ace Attorney series has much more in common with those original adventure games than it does with any visual novels. But it's clear that those early visual novels had a really big impact, and the music of Banshee's Last Cry in particular was very influential, including for Sugimori. So to give you an example, just have a listen to this one tune from Banshee's Last Cry called Nightmare. You can really hear a lot of Ace Attorney in it. So again, a lot of space between the phrases of the bass line, like in Gumshoe's theme, and a lot of parts where almost all the other instruments drop out except for the drums. So it's very possible that the score to Banshee's Last Cry is where Sugimori got the idea to use a lot of space in the Ace Attorney score. But what's the effect of it? Well, like 8-bit music theory said, silence creates a lot of anticipation in the listener. You know, it creates tension that gets resolved when the music kicks back in. You know, oftentimes when we think about tension and resolution in music, we usually think about it in terms of harmony, right? Where like, if you have a dissonant chord wants to resolve to a consonant chord. So for example, if you take a chord like this G7 sharp 5, that's a really tense chord, you know, a really dissonant chord. It wants to go somewhere. It wants to resolve to a consonant chord, like a C major. Listen to it. See what I mean? But like 8-bit said, you can achieve a similar effect by using silence, where in this case it's not a dissonant chord resolving to a consonant chord, but rather silence resolving to sound. And sometimes that effect can be really exciting. Like, on a more macro level, think about how exciting it is when you successfully point out a contradiction and all of the music immediately cuts out. Like, that silence between when you successfully present evidence and the objection theme finally kicking in just builds so much anticipation, it's thrilling. So basically what Sugimori did was take this idea of using silence to build tension and taking it to the next level, to the point where it's such a defining element of that original game's score. And you know, I think we all can really learn from that. You know, sometimes when you're composing something and you just keep adding layers upon layers of information, it's not a bad idea to take a step back and think, you know, maybe the answer here isn't more notes. Maybe the answer is nothing. But what do you think are the defining elements of Ace Attorney's music? Please do let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate a like, and maybe subscribe to the channel too. You know, I've done a lot of analysis of Ace Attorney's music over the past couple of months, and I'm not about to stop here. And also, don't forget to check out and wishlist Detective Instinct for Well My Beloved on Steam. The link is in the description. Well, alright. Until next time, guys. Peace.